This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm sitting in an unusual brewing space, one of the more unusual ones that I've been to, at Narrow Gauge Brewing here with Jeff Hardesty. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is a tight little basement brewery space, and you know, with lowish ceilings and kind of tucked away here in Florissant, Missouri. You've got quite an interesting setup. We're kind of recovering from yesterday's perennial Midwestern Belgian Beer Fest, but holding on strong, feeling good this morning. Definitely did some behaving. We're going to talk to Jeff about some brewing and how he brews his beer. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way with innovative solutions for the craft brewing industry. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast and you'll receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller unit. And turn your fridge into the best beer bar around with the Tavour app. Get access to hard-to-find 100% independent craft beer from 47 states. Only buy the beers you want and skip the ones you don't. Ship any amount of your hand-picked beer to your doorstep for one flat fee. Yep, any amount. Download the free Tavour app today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. So Jeff, we can hear some fermentation bubbling in the background. It sounds so nice and so soothing as a brewery. But this is a crazy little setup here. Kind of walk me through your brewing history, how you got into this, how you decided to start a business around it, and then how you ended up in the basement of Cugino's
Sure.
Here out in Florissant in this compact, small footprint brewery.
Definitely. So it's not exactly what we initially sought out for with our original business plan when my wife and I were putting together basically what we wanted to do with our lives, or hopefully the rest of our lives if everything panned out right. So we actually originally wanted to very much focus on like a farmhouse style brewery.
Sure.
Obviously, that's not anywhere remotely close to what we did. We quickly learned, like pushing forward with our business plan as just us two, it wasn't really ever going to be a feasible option. Getting a loan from a bank from somebody that's never had a day of professional brewing experience is not something usually people are willing to throw money at. So we kind of paired up with Cugino's here in Florissant. Ben and Dave, which are owners of Cugino's, are two of our business partners as well. So they had this banquet space in the basement that they suggested to me. And as soon as I heard basement, I'm like, I don't know, because I was expecting even shorter ceilings than we have. Not that they're tall by any means, but we managed to fit quite a bit of stuff in our small space down here. So it's kind of been a crazy start. Things took off a lot quicker than we expected they would, and luckily we've been able to grow and fill this space and at capacity in this current location. So.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, obviously St. Louis has a very long brewing tradition, and there are some, even some fantastic craft brewers in St. Louis that have been going at it for a long time. Even from Schlafly to, of course, perennial and side project on the.
Definitely.
So it's a developed beer market. There are, there's solid, kind of players in the market. How did, as you were thinking about the beer that you wanted to make, come about creating a niche for your brewery?
Yeah, that's something like pushing forward with our business ideas, what we were going to do. The Hazy IPA was not a thing in St. Louis at all. It was a beer style that I had learned through trading, traveling. It was just something I couldn't get here. And as a home brewer, instead of trading away all the beers I was standing in line waiting for then for IPAs, it was what can I do to make something at home similar, and that was not an easy task by any means. So it was probably about a year and a half of development to get my IPAs where they were. and they've even developed more since the brewery's been open. So I would say our first year was more refining some of our recipes. I was happy with them at the start, but I think they definitely improved over time.
Yeah, talk to me about that. I mean, as you're tasting other people's beers and you're inspired by these things, what does that process look like about translating, that inspiration into, beers that are going to taste like something that you brew and that, the way that you want them to taste?
Sure. Lots of research. So, especially whenever I was trying to develop my New England style or hazy IPAs, it was not a very broad known thing. So there was a lot of questions out there. What's creating this haze? Is it a grain bill? Is it the yeast? Is it the hopping rate? And what is it? So I got really hung up on hop timing for way too long. And that's honestly like what...
In what way?
So like just different additions in the kettle, different additions in the whirlpool, different dry hopping timing, things like that. So like that ate a ton of time in development, and I kind of felt like I was at a standstill. I wasn't ever getting to the point I wanted to be. So I started digging a little deeper. What else can I try? So I started messing around with water chemistry, and that was some of the things I was starting to read. More of that information was coming out.
Yeah.
JC from Trillium was pretty open on Beer Advocates Forum.
Right.
So I was able to like kind of see some of what they're doing, get an idea of what's going on, and it kind of helped push me a little bit more in the direction of where we are today. But it was also a lot of, I'm going to try this. Because I want our beers to be different. I don't want to make a beer that's exactly the same as somebody else's. It's a matter of like putting our own twist onto what we do.
Sure, no, and I mean, inevitably, character is going to develop because every brew house is different, and even if everyone's using the same ingredients some way, there's different hop lots, and an infinite amount of different things that can happen there. But it's interesting. I like that idea that you got hung up thinking that it was hops timing and how you add them, and then instead really found that it was a water chemistry piece that helped pull those together. What is it about that water profile that that you ended up with that helps these beers taste the way you want them to taste?
It's it just kind of like changed the perceived I guess aspects of what the hops were bringing to the beer. So and both like bitterness when you're tasting as well as the flavor and aroma were slightly different. So St. Louis has pretty high sulfate water, so that's stereotypically was really good for IPAs for a long time. People wanted to boost sulfates, and that's still very popular in like West Coast style IPAs, but it's very much the opposite in most of the New England style. So boosting up those chlorides definitely made the aroma and flavor of our beers pop out a little more.
Are there specific salts that you're using then, chlorides, that you find deliver in better character than others?
So I've not really messed around with too many different sources of chlorides. So we use calcium chloride, which also has some benefits for yeast with the calcium. So it's something we started with, and we actually used to add a little bit of gypsum, so calcium sulfate, and that would, in the very beginning, it wasn't a very large portion of what we were adjusting in our water, but it's something we ultimately took out over time, where I just didn't think it was adding anything to the beer, and we did some trials side by side with and without it, and there wasn't a ton of difference, so we kind of made the decision to cut it out of our process.
Is there an ideal ratio, or does that change beer to beer?
So like truthfully, a lot of our light beers we treat the water exactly the same. So even like our lagers we treat the same as our New England IPAs, which is a little weird. So we typically try and shoot for about a 1-to-1 ratio, a little bit higher on the chloride side. So it depends on our source water in. we get basic reports of what it is. This is the range.
Right.
So we're probably anywhere between 1:1 to 1.5 to 1, higher on the chloride.
How often do you get those reports?
So it's as often as the water company
provides
them. It's something I should probably do a little more of and actually send it into labs and make sure they're giving me correct information.
Sure.
But so far, water has been pretty good to us here, but that's not really an excuse not to check on it. But
of course.
It's a matter of just doing it.
So you even do that with your lagers, though, huh?
Yeah, which is real strange. So, and kind of my mindset in that is, so especially like a Czech-style Pilsner, which is supposed to be like the cleanest water possible.
Right.
Trying to balance the chlorides, the sulfate to kind of trick your brain into perceiving it as a softer water profile is kind of where my mentality is. And it's kind of like I really enjoy where our lagers are at, and kind of where I started. Haven't done too much trial and error with the water on the lagers just because I've been happy with where it started.
Well, you're in a lager state, that makes a whole lot of them.
Definitely.
And I guess if you're trying to carve out a niche that's different with those lagers, you might as well make something that doesn't taste like the standard lagers that everyone else is making around here.
Definitely.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit. It's obviously you mentioned the large folks at the breweries on hazy New England style IPAs.
Definitely.
And that you've obviously definitely built an audience for that here, kind of carved out a niche with it. How, as a small brewery, have you gone about creating new ideas for these hazy IPAs? I mean, I think that kind of persistent challenge in the world of brewing to do something new and interesting. Consumers always want to try something new. They always want a new story there. Seems like breweries are making tons and tons of different beers, but a lot of them have the same hops in them over and over again. So how, from your creative process, how does that look when you're, you start thinking about making a new beer, envisioning it and then going through that process of creating it?
So that's, it kind of develops over multiple beers that we brew. So, we do a single hop series, which actually is, I guess, selfishly a little helpful for me, but it's also something I like to try and have be there for our customers that come in that are interested. What does this hop specifically taste like? So whenever we're doing IPA developments with blends of hops, I kind of run back through that catalog of the single hop beers that we've done. What characters did those hops bring to the table? Where do I think they would match well with other hops? That kind of gives me a catalog of what these different hop flavors. So if I'm doing a blend, that's how I'm going to kind of perceive what I think's the best hop combo. It also tells me what hops do customers are not as keen on because maybe they're a little more aggressive and like resinous quality. So it gives me an idea of the ratio of that hop should be less if I'm blending it. But I think
how's that feedback, Lou? Are you talking to the customers? Are you reading your Untapped reviews?
Both. Like Untapped, it's a love-hate thing.
I love that you'll admit to it.
Yeah. No, like I'm not anywhere near as obsessive as I used to be, but Untapped's like very much a love-hate situation. So it definitely gives me an area to make sure we don't have an issue with a package can or anything that we're sending out there. So it has that, and it also has all the riffraff that comes with it. So,
Sure. But you're able to then track and see, especially if you're taking, trying something new or using a different hop, and seeing how the customers review that rated, relative to some of your other similar beers.
Definitely so. So there's few hops that people they like them by themselves, but they're much better blend hops. So like El Dorado's one I would consider that, and I love a single El Dorado beer. It's like one of my favorite beers we've made, but it just wasn't a quick mover for us. And it rightfully so, because El Dorado is a pretty distinct hop. You get some interesting flavors out of it. So, like, just the feedback from that, like, we use El Dorado in quite a few of our beers, and it's generally at a lower portion than a higher, and I think it adds a nice degree of complexity.
What kind of percentages do you like to use it in?
So, like, Cloud City, That's a beer. We even split all 4 of the hops that are in it, so it's at a 25% rate of the dry hop.
Okay.
And then let me think. Join us in creating excellence. It's a little higher, so it's probably about 40 to 45% of the hop bill, so it's a little more aggressive in it. But
join us in creating excellence.
Which
so
is
juice, right?
Juice, yeah.
Okay.
Which is
I see what you did there.
Requiem for a Dream reference.
Okay.
So one of my favorite movies, and I was watching it one night. The infomercial popped on, and I'm like, oh yeah. It's like, that's a great beer name. Look it up on Untappd. Nobody has it. I'm like, yep, taking that one.
Inspiration comes from all sides.
For sure.
Let's talk a little bit more about how you use hops. But first, balancing barley and hops is your expertise. And for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert. And when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants, backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION. That's 855-692-5274. Or visit ClarionLubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the expert that experts trust. Also, this episode is brought to you by Brew Guru, the free mobile app that alerts you to local discounts on beer, food, and homebrewing supplies. Created by the American Homebrewers Association, Brew Guru is your essential guide to brewing and drinking great beer. Start a 30-day free trial, no credit card info required, when you download Brew Guru for iPhone or Android. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the hops you use and how you're using them and the timing you're using them. But before we do that, we should probably maybe open a beer and try some.
Yeah, let's go ahead and drink some Double Drop Cloud City.
Nothing like drinking some beer at 10-something in the morning after a beer festival. But
you got to do it at some point.
We're professionals.
Yeah, so this one, kind of talked about it a minute ago about the El Dorado being about a quarter
double dry hopped Cloud City.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy, El Dorado. So some of the easy button hops is what I like to call them.
The easy button hops.
Yeah, like so Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy.
Right.
I always call easy button hops.
Okay.
Like, as long as you got a decent IPA base, it'd be pretty hard to make a not decent beer with those hops.
Okay. But still, some people manage to.
For sure.
I guess the bigger problem though is, how do you get new flavors or branch out from those? You can't make the same Citra Mosaic
for sure
beer over and over and over again. Same Citra Galaxy beer, although I think some brewers do.
Yeah, it's we're going to use these hops and we'll just put it in a different order on our label.
Right. Like, we're going to use 5% of this and it's going to be a totally different beer. And again, there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Like, those can, create interesting and new things, even in small amounts. But again, consumers, who legitimately want to try new things are also looking for that experience.
Definitely.
And it becomes, harder and harder to kind of, craft, those kinds of different experiences for them.
For sure.
What are some of the directions that you go in order to kind of do that?
So I kind of watch around the market, kind of like keep keen on some of the new hops jumping up. So we do some ordering. We order from a bunch of different hop suppliers. So like when the experimental hop data has come out and it's
right.
This hop's going to have this kind of type of character. Those are always intriguing, but it's also not always easy to just try and use one of those hops and have no real experience with it and hope things turn out well. But we have done that.
There's always a delta to some degree between what they say a hop is going to taste like or provide and what it actually does. How do you test that? And you just go at it and make a batch, or
typically so. I generally let the market at other breweries kind of tell me how things are perceived. So if it's an experimental hop I'm interested in, I try and see if there's anyone else out there that has made something with it and kind of what the general overall perception of that hop was, which isn't always available. If a hop sounds interesting enough, I'll just say, screw it, let's brew a 6-barrel batch. Worst case scenario, we got to dump it.
Right.
Which is never fun, but we did a real interesting trial with an experimental hop from Hopsteiner, and it was like the descriptors were cocoa, caramel, and tropical fruit. So it's super weird sounding, and I'm like, I want to try it. We'll see how it is. And when it was finished, the nose on it almost smelled like there was a little bit of like our porter left in a glass.
Oh, wow.
And then the IPA got filled on top of it. So it definitely brought a different dynamic to the beer. Would it be great in IPAs? Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think it made a bad beer by any means, but it was kind of a fun trial. But
what hop was that?
So it was experimental 06300.
Okay.
So that's really the only time we've done an experimental single hop.
Okay.
And it was because I wanted to see what that brought to the table. But some of the other hops that we've brought in that have shown like very good market data was like Sabro,
right?
Strata, Enigma, which would have been like a few years ago when we first brought that in. But those are all hops that seem to be gaining some traction and all. Out of those hops, like Strata was definitely a standout for me. I really, really enjoyed the single hop Strata beer we did. So,
what does Strata bring to a beer? How do you describe that from a sensory perspective?
Yeah, so the way it was perceived in our beers, I got a lot of like dankness out of it, and some nice like pineapple notes. So it almost
a little Simcoe, huh?
Yeah, to an extent, it reminded me a bit of like Mosaic.
Okay.
But
definitely
had a different element to it.
Okay.
I think it was a little more dank than what Mosaic is.
Okay.
But those are generally like Mosaic's probably my favorite hop to work with and to consume. And it's kind of along that same line, and I think that's why I enjoyed it so much. And it was also a hop that was definitely our customer base really enjoyed it. So it was one of our more popular single hop beers. So it was cool to see a hop like that being able to be in the same category in a single hop beer as like a Citra single hop or Mosaic, or Galaxy single hop type beers.
Have you gone back the other direction at all? And I've always found it interesting, I have recently found it interesting to see brewers using noble hops and another kind of classic style hops in some smaller amounts in their hazy IPAs.
That's something we always joke about. Like I'll dry hop a fermenter and say, I accidentally did Fuggles. What was I doing? Like just messing around, because we all like have our love for Fuggles in certain beers, but they're not that great smelling. So it's something I've toyed more with the idea about. I've seen some, I think, publications out there that they're showing like the oil contents or the different oil contents can actually be beneficial mixed with some of the biotransformation that goes on in yeast, as well as some of the other hops, but it's something I've not spent a ton of time researching yet.
Okay.
But we have used some hops that have been more on the noble side before use. So trying to remember, I think it was Grunge Yeast hop from Hopheads Farms. Opening that bag and smelling it, it was a beer we did for a festival specific. So it was open the bag, smell it, and I'm like, I don't know about this. Just because the aroma was like very noble-esque of a hop. But it was like, we're already committed to do the beer. We might as well just do it. And the finished product, I would have never believed anyone that was the same hop that went in it.
Really?
But I know it was. So, it was.
What happened through that fermentation process that changed it?
I guess just the biotransformation process with the yeast. Like it had a very noble character, smell pre going into the beer, and then afterwards it was very much like all the pinpoints that you want. So tropical fruit. Everything out of it, as opposed to the more the earthy, noble type characters you would expect after smelling it.
Sure. Talk to me a little bit about what you've settled on for a hops addition process.
Sure.
I mean, I imagine there's not much, or if any, going into on the hot side up until whirlpooling. But talk to me about your addition process.
Sure. So generally kettle for our IPAs, we're not doing anything but whirlpool. And a lot of the times we've done a lot of trials with this. So some of our beers are very much a blend of hops in the whirlpool. Some of them are single. So like a beer like DDHOJ Run, that's a single hop in the whirlpool, which is Apollo.
Okay.
So it's not really a hop you would expect for that, but we've done trials of all Apollo in the whirlpool, all Galaxy in the whirlpool, and the perception on the beers prior to dry hop are very similar.
Interesting.
It's not the same.
Okay.
We've had times where, for instance, one of the times we tried it, I think we did half Apollo, half Galaxy, and then the other one was all Apollo, like normal. And the Galaxy one had like this awesome peach flavor.
Okay.
For this one time, I'm like, sweet, maybe we're on to something different here, add a new aspect to this beer. Did the trial again, and it was not there.
Huh.
So I don't know if it was the lot of Galaxy we had or what was going on there. We've done kind of the same trials.
So at that point, really, your whirlpool is producing a softer bitterness, but it's really not having an aromatic, contribution then to the beer.
Not much, and like we don't chill down our whirlpool, so we're thrown in right at knockout, so that might contribute some of it.
Okay.
We don't really have the best setup to be able to drop our temp.
Right.
We could do it, but
how long do you whirlpool for?
We're generally whirlpooling 5 minutes, and then we let set roughly about 20 minutes. So we do a 15-minute heat sanitize through our heat exchanger. So the time it takes to get to 170 or above, and then 15 minutes. So it's generally probably 17 to 20 minute rest, and then we knock out our 6-barrel batch pretty quick. So we're like 25 to 30 minutes from the kettle to the fermenter.
Okay.
So it's not sitting in there for too terribly long, but it definitely adds a bitterness to the beer that I think needs to be there. And it's, I guess at first we were putting in like a 60-minute, like the first batch of Fallen Flag. We did like a half-pound edition, which looking back on it is kind of funny to think about. Pulling all that out, and it was more just over time, seeing customers mention things like, oh, it's a little bitter than some of the other ones. So that's something we kind of pulled out over time.
Yeah. I guess that's, given the differing sizes of brew houses, that's always an interesting challenge for a home brewer, on hop stand or whirlpooling. Like, it's such a small volume of liquid that can lose heat so much faster than, and even you with a 6-barrel system much smaller than say something like Great Notion brewing on a 30-barrel system, and and again they're, in order to get any kind of whirlpool effect, they are having to drop temperature a little bit, otherwise that volume of liquid is just going to hold on to all of that heat, and all of those have I guess certainly can have different effects on how those hops perform in that environment. How in terms of the quality of bitterness, you obviously could do it either way. Put it in the front, put it at the rear if it's just there to kind of produce bitterness. But what from your tests has adding that bitterness through the whirlpooling process done? What is there a tangible quality that's different to that bitterness?
Yeah, and I think you're getting a much different perception of the bitterness. I don't think it's as harsh on the palate. I don't know if harsh is a good word, but it's softer on the palate, kind of like what you said earlier. And it does add like a general hoppiness flavor to an extent to the beer. And it's something that's there, but it's also something that doesn't vary too much depending on what the hops are there from the trials that we've done. So that's kind of why we've consciously moved more towards the direction of using a easier, cheaper hop in the whirlpool and saving the expensive hops for the dry hops.
Sure.
Especially this day and age when hops are getting harder and harder to source. At times it's easy, times it's not. So anyway, we can figure out.
Galaxy is expensive, and if it's just going to be a kind of a semi-bittering hop with no aromatic contribution, like why spend that many dollars per pound on that hop. No, that makes sense. Talk to me then, like moving from the hot side, to the cold side. Talk to me a little bit about, if you're willing to share what kind of yeast you use, and then that kind of dry hopping process, timing, and how you're adding these hops in order to achieve the effect you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. We're kind of different on our yeast selection compared to, I've had tons of conversations with people in the industry making the hazy IPAs, and I've yet to find anyone using the same strain we do.
Really?
And we use Omega yeast, and we use the British Ale 4.
Okay.
Which I believe derived from the Y yeast Thames Valley strain, and that basically came from my homebrewing days. So it's a strain I kind of fell in love with multiple beers. So it worked out great in IPAs, works out great in porters, works out great in stouts. It's a very nice yeast to make a pretty big range of beers in it. So we've done trials of yeast here too, since we have two 12-barrel brights. We can do, so we've done like London Ale 3, which is what most people are using, and then our strain. Side by side, try and blind, and I have two brewers that work with me, and obviously one had to pull it, so it wasn't blind to them, but I tried it blind, and one of my brewers tried it blind, and we both preferred our strain over the London Ale 3. That can be because that's what we're used to.
Sure.
But that's something we try and get trials in there to see if we can make our beers better.
When you say you liked it better, what was it about it that you liked better?
I thought the hops were much more present in ours as opposed to the London Ale 3. They were both good beers. But the overall perception of the hop and the aroma and flavor was much more present than the London Ale 3. I would say the London Ale 3 was a bit softer of a beer, the way I perceived it, which could have been... the attenuation's a little lower on the London Ale 3, so I think it was a touch sweeter than the other, which might have been the reasoning on both ends of why the hops were perceived a little different. But overall, the beers were pretty similar. And ultimately, we blended those into a batch together and packaged it, which is always... a little worrisome because we, as a brewery, want to be as consistent as possible, but we still want to push ourselves to make our beers better. There's some beers we don't ever touch anymore, so like Double Dry Up Fallen Flags, a beer. We don't do a ton of random tests like that on, especially like a yeast change. We might do a malt change just to kind of source a new potential malt. Just because it is getting tougher at times to get some of the malt we prefer, which is interesting. Which is just kind of, I guess, shows where the market's at. People are putting more money into malts in all their beers, which is nice to see, but it's also not always necessary. So, we use a lot of English malts, whether it's Simpson's or Thomas Fawcett. Malts is typically what we go with. So
why?
So that was.
I mean, there again, you're spending money on these. What kind of with that, and that's base malt. What do those kinds of kind of English base malts produce for these beers that you don't get out of say some standard 2-row?
Sure. So you get more of a nutty type flavor is what I perceive out of using some of the Golden Promise or Pearl malt. We get a nice nutty aspect that I think just builds a complexity into the beer that's not necessarily there with a very, I guess, I'm trying to think the best way to explain, but some of the 2-row is very basic, where it doesn't bring a ton of grain flavor in. So we've done trial side by side with multiple 2-rows and our English malts that we generally prefer. And we've had times where we've made beers that we liked better that were on 2-row. But it was definitely a little bit different of a beer. So it's kind of hard to just shift that beer over to that, but it's something we always keep in mind with a new beer. So if we want to try this malt in this brand new IPA we're doing, see how the perception is, and maybe it's a bit similar to another beer we make, we can kind of get an idea if our customers perceive that malt the same as we did down here, or that we thought it was better. Which doesn't always transpire that way, but it also is subjective because it's a different beer. So it's always hard to like weigh some of those things in, but we do a lot of trials just for our learning.
Right. I'm kind of sensing that theme here. And, I guess that's one benefit of having a rather small brew house is that you're brewing a whole lot. And that you can kind of, test these variables for yourself as you kind of move through that.
Very much so.
Yeah, let's cut off track talking about malt there, which is great. But let's go back and
to the yeast
talk
and
about that kind of that fermentation and that cold side process.
Sure. So we do harvest our yeast, so we don't do any super crazy early dry hopping. I know some people are throwing hops in like right at knockout up to like 2 days in, but we're generally doing our first edition or our only edition, depending if it's a regular dry hop or a double dry hop at day 6 or 7.
Okay.
So as soon as we can pull enough yeast for another batch is basically when we'll dry hop.
Okay.
Which falls in that 6 to 7 day range for us. And if we're doing a double dry hop, we're generally 24 to 48 hours apart.
Okay.
Depending on our schedule and where we're at. But we try and
so your double dry hop is actually 2 dry hops then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do 2 dry hops.
It's a very flexible definition of double dry hop these days. So.
Yeah, and that was like when the first time we double dry hopped a beer, we were probably already open over a year.
Okay.
So it was like, and the reason I did it was I started to get like hop fatigue personally.
Okay.
So I'm like, none of our beers smell or taste like anything to me anymore, which is a hard thing to overcome, especially when you're supposed to be making new beers. So that was when I decided I wanted to do a double dry hop beer and see how that goes. And little did I know that was going to turn like everything into needing to be double dry hopped. So like we went from...
So it's not just, to make consumers happy with some different acronym on it. It really is, even for yourself, because, you just grew too comfortable and immune to the hops charms like that.
And I think that's something we'll probably see more and more as these hop saturated IPAs are out there. And it's super easy to get overwhelmed by that and want more, but realistically more probably can never exist.
Right.
Because like we smell hops down here in the raw form, so it's never going to get more pungent than that.
Right.
So it's a matter, and I think that's why I like new hops so much as well, because I perceive them a lot better because it's something I'm not as familiar with.
Right.
But there are some new hops that are like, this doesn't really taste like much to me. And I think it's just got some of the similar qualities as some of the, like Citra. I have a really, really hard time perceiving for some reason.
Okay.
It's one of the difficult hops for me to actually perceive its aroma and flavor.
Going hops blind.
Yeah, it sucks. Like, it's not fun, but I kind of got my tricks to pretty much make it where I can have a sip or two or smell and perceive it. And one of that's like a dark beer, so like our porter we have on, it's very good to like drink a little like taster of it and then go to a hoppy beer. To me, it's like the best hoppy beer is the beer after that. So I'll do that.
Almost has like a little coffee kind of palate reset.
Exactly. So that works for me. It may not work for other people, but like drinking non-IPAs in between definitely helps, but the darker ones seem to be more beneficial to me.
Yeah. So you talked about biotransformation, but then you're also mentioning that you're harvesting yeast before you dry hop. Do you see what we would typically call biotransformation happening when you're not dry hopping, until so late in the process?
We believe
like, even by 6 to 7 days, is there still fermentation occurring? I mean, it's still yeast activity?
Yeah, essentially when we're dry hopping, the krausen's falling. So there's generally like a small layer of foam still on the beer, or you can tell it just fell. So there's definitely some active yeast in suspension, and we do still see the beer lower in gravity after we dry hop as well.
Okay. And how long do you leave those dry hops in?
So for our single dry hop, we're 5 days. So as soon as we put them in, we bung off our fermenter. So we capture a lot of natural carbonation as well.
Sure.
So when we're pushing from our fermenter into our brights, it's generally like 1.8 volumes of carbonation. So we actually retain quite a bit, which I also think helps keep some of that hop aroma in the beer as well, because you're not blowing it all out your tank.
How does that affect something like hops creep? Do you see any of that additional fermentation happening, and what do you do to control it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of something that's part of our process, so we know it's going to be there, and we kind of run our brew house to compensate for it. So we want it to finish at a certain gravity. So we've learned over time where we need to mash in order to finish right where we want to be.
Okay.
And it doesn't really seem to change with that. So it's, I think, very much kind of just a part of the process that we've learned to adjust for.
Interesting. Is there a specific way that you're actually adding to the tank? You just popping them open and dropping hops in, or
pretty much. Okay. So our 6-barrel fermenters have 6-inch dry hop ports, and that's something I'm like, I need big ports to dump in. If I could have a manway on them, I would much rather prefer that. But we actually got some of these square buckets that had fruit puree in it that have worked out like really awesome for dry hopping. So we basically measure them out in the buckets, and the corner gives us a nice trajectory straight into the fermenter without dumping hops all over the top and floor, like trying to get them all in. So basically we're just dumping straight in, which was a little bit of a learning challenge. I took quite a few beer baths in the process of figuring out how to not create a beer volcano. So happened a few times to me, but luckily I can say right now I've not had that in probably 2 years. So I'll probably get one next week now that I said that. But
when as a small brewery, one of the big challenges, again, brewing 6-barrel batches, is buying hops in enough volume to be able to either select or really be able to evaluate and get exactly the hops that you're looking for. How do you evaluate these things as they come in? If you're buying small batches, not necessarily on contract, or I don't know if you contract or not. How do you, with these smaller batches of small hops, kind of qualify them for your own use, make sure that they're meeting your expectation for what that specific hop is, and then make the decisions about how to use them in the brew house.
That can always be a challenge, especially now. Like some of the hops that aren't contractable, you very much see that variation. But we do contract a decent amount of hops. So like our Citra, Mosaic, Eldorado, we actually contract Columbus, which is kind of insane probably some people to think about. But the Columbus we're getting through Willamette Valley is super awesome. So it's something I know is probably going to always be there, but I might as well just contract it because I know I'm going to use it. But whenever we're buying like hops for the first time, opening them up, if something isn't quite right smelling, which hasn't happened very often, we've had a few batches of things where I'm like, this doesn't smell like I think it should. We'll generally not use those for dry hop, so it's like won't use those for that. We'll put them aside. If they work in a different style of beer, or we're making a beer that we do want a decent amount of bitterness, we can use it for our bittering charge. things like that. But one way I'll occasionally evaluate hop is throw a couple pellets and a sample of one of the beers that we have fermenting or at the end of fermentation before they're dry hopped, and kind of see what nose I might get out of it once it's a little bit in solution, and kind of get a feel from it there.
Yeah. Should we try another beer?
Yeah, for sure. We'll drink some Helles.
All right, so we're going to switch gears now and get into talking a little bit about lagers. You've got a Helles now.
Yeah,
Share.
for sure. Whoa.
So how do you build a character for these that at the same time is classic, but also feels like something you're brewing? I mean, they're again, you're in a state that of Missouri,
Sure.
which is kind of known for that one lager brewery.
Yeah.
And so people here have expectations, but also have a deep familiarity with these with these styles of beer, and of course the other great lager producers like Urban Chestnut and stuff. Now on the craft side. How do you then, and for a brewery this size with, some small fermenters and a small
Sure.
brew house, like tank time is money. And
For
so,
sure.
2.5 months in a tank, could easily make that more expensive than some of your
yeah, for
IPAs
sure.
to produce. So again, why do it? And then how do you, find a way to kind of make these beers, give them a character that feels like you?
Sure.
While still being respectful to that kind of tradition and history.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it kind of like touches back to what we talked about, water profile. So
Right.
I would say like maybe that's what makes the lagers we make unique to us is basically creating our own water profile, using it on all our lagers, and
Right.
much like the reason people adjust water profiles now. So every water profile is adjusted typically to meet a classic
Right.
water profile of where this beer was developed. And sometimes we do that, try and hit as close as possible to what the water profile is. And sometimes we don't have that option. So with the higher sulfates that we have, I just try and do something to help, I guess, flip-flop that perception of the beer. So that's kind of our throw or our spin into the lagers that we produce. Other than that, though, like I try and make them as close to the historical values that I can find or literature that I've read. So it's one of the things I'm extremely passionate about in the brewery is to make different styles of beer and show that we can make classic styles of beer.
Right.
That we're not just coming in to make hazy IPAs and that's all we want to do, because it's very much not all we want to do.
Is there a different audience for this beer than your typical one? I mean, you are here again in the basement of an Italian restaurant, kind of bar, and you were talking before. You mentioned that the kind of clientele there was $1 a beer kind of audience. That and they've trained on now on these hazy IPAs that you make, but at the same time, like now you're going back and brewing some lagers.
Sure.
There still is there an audience there for that?
Definitely so. So we've pretty much from the get-go had a lot of IPAs, so that's not very appealing to a lot of people. And Kajina's being here for since 2004, so they're here 12 years before we started making beer here. So they had that built-in clientele that they groomed to the point of the brewery moving in, because they very much were a dollar beer bar when they first took over, and they slowly converted to a craft beer bar. So before the brewery was here, they had 56 craft beer taps.
Right.
Well, I guess not all craft beer. Some was Budweiser and whatnot. But they kind of groomed their customer base a little bit to that extent, and they're also bringing in some new faces in, having all those beers. So a beer like the lager definitely is more popular with the original clientele that was coming in the building.
Sure.
So we definitely see an increase in draft sales. So our lagers are one of the highest draft sales beers we make.
Yeah.
So like our draft to packaging is The draft is, I shouldn't say much higher, but it's probably like 60% of the batch, 40% of its package. So, and most our beers are probably 80% package, 20% draft, like IPAs. So that kind of tells you the cans move a little bit slower and the draft moves a little bit faster because we can still maintain having a lager strain on hand. So the Helles we're drinking right now was the 9th generation of that yeast.
Oh, wow.
So that in itself takes a lot of cost out of it too, because a lager pitch is not cheap.
No.
So the first time we did our Keller beer, we did one batch with it, and it was more of a trial. How fast is this beer going to move? Can it allow us to have a lager strain on house?
Right.
And it's very much moved quick, which was very exciting because it allowed us to take this yeast strain to 9 generations.
Yeah.
It's also allowed us to make a Helles, an IPL we made as well. So it's fun to be able to dive into some different styles and have another yeast on hand to say, hey, let's brew a Vienna lager today.
Yeah. What does your lager process look like? I mean, for a small brewery, again, you know, with a dual purpose, a system and process that was really built and designed for brewing ales. That's been, pushed into service to kind of, make lagers. What does that look like for you? And, how does that process kind of proceed from, kind of ingredient ideas all the way through the brewing and then the lagering process?
Yeah, so between the lagerings, they all have very similar fermentation profiles. So we essentially knock our batch out to the low end of the yeast strain we use temperature-wise, and slowly over the course of like 6 days, let it climb to its high end. So we hold it on the lower end for 48 or so hours, and then we let it rise over the course of 72 hours or so up to the high end. And then fermentation's pretty much done then. We'll give it a couple days to climb up to mid-60s or so for a diacetyl rest, and then we'll slowly chill it down. So over the course of probably 2 days or so, we'll take it from that 65 down to 34 or so degrees in the fermenter. And then depending on what that beer is, will be how long it's in that fermenter. So our Keller beer, it may be chilled for 2 or 3 days before we push it to our bright. And when we push it to the bright, we let it sit there an additional 2 weeks for the Keller beer. So Keller beer is nice because it doesn't tie up fermentation time. We can work our schedule where it doesn't, it takes the same amount of time essentially as like an IPA.
Okay.
Excuse me. So, it kind of just works out really well with that beer. And, a beer like the Helles, we've transferred at the same time we would an IPA to a bright, but we also leave it in that bright for like 4 weeks. Instead of the 2 weeks. So every time we do that, we're tying up one of our brights, which automatically means we're packaging twice a week instead of once a week. So it makes our brew weeks a little bit longer, but that's beer we're all passionate for down here. And at least I don't think they care too much that we're packaging twice a week. We generally make it work on a brew day or a single turn day, and doesn't really add too much time to our weeks.
Right. Are you doing? You mentioned that you bung the tanks when you're dry hopping. Do you do that with your lagers to carry some of that natural carbonation? Or
a little bit, not as aggressive. It's something I want to try, but I'm also worried trapping some of the sulfur aromas and whatnot you get out of a lager fermentation in there. So I've not been too aggressive with trying to do that.
Right. Is there another beer that we can have
for sure? You can drink a sour IPA.
Let's do that.
Yeah, which this one's a current affair. So it was it's got lactose, chamomile, blackcurrant, vanilla bean, which kind of spun off of a collab beer we did with Central Standard Brewing out of Wichita. So it was the first sour IPA we did was with them, and it actually was in that foeder over here. And my my plan was to do a foeder that we could do some quick turnaround sour IPAs, gozas, things like that in. And after one time, it spontaneously fermented. The second time we filled it. So I'm guessing we pulled enough of our house strain in it while we were pumping out the first batch of sour IPA that we did.
Okay. Wow.
It's very dark.
Nobody can see this, but it's almost like deep burgundy red with a beautiful pink foam head on it.
Yeah, so it was a beer I wanted to bring back. It's not one, and like I don't really like to bring back a collab beer. A collab beer is supposed to be a collab beer. This isn't exactly what that beer was. Like the amount of chamomiles definitely went up, and then the use of vanilla beans in it, and obviously it wasn't in the foeder this time. So it's the second time we've made this beer. The original beer I was talking about with Drop Ceiling was the name of it.
Okay.
And we still have people like get this beer and they're like, Drop Ceiling was better. Which is cool to like see the following that came from that collab we did with CSB.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your sour IPA progress and process. I find, and it's certainly a matter and subject to debate of talking about why these beers are called IPA or sour IPA. I don't know if we need to get into that debate. There's a great article in the next issue of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine from Randy Mosher talking about these beers, and he comes back to that point that all styles are simply what people expect them to be, and so at this day and age, IPA has simply come to mean has hops in it, so it's this shorthand for this has hops in it, and and certainly you can taste the hops in this beer, and they're strong and they're present, even though it's very fruity and also has an acidic component to it. But tell me a little bit about how you think about building these beers and balancing all of those competing flavors. Because with that acidity, that sweetness, that vanilla and that spice character, and the hot, that's a lot going on in a beer like this.
And these beers tend to be the ones that I pour out and I can drink a full glass in like 20 seconds because my brain's like, I want to try everything in this beer, and my brain's constantly trying to find everything that's in it. So they're super fun beers. They're some of my favorite beers to actually write recipes for. Because it's almost more culinary based.
Right.
So with most everything, I try and mimic some sort of dessert, but not always. So like this one doesn't really have any like dessert by any means that uses those components, but the use of like chamomile I've used in wits before, and I've always liked the character that comes with it. And it's one of those things where generally if I'm going to use a fruit, I'm going to look up what weird spices go well with it. What fruits pair well with it and things like that. So in development of the beer, it's very much revolves around what the additions are going to be. So as soon as I make a decision on this is the fruit I'm going to use, that's when I'll determine all the rest. So generally hop-wise, I'm looking at hops that are high in flavors associated with like lime per se.
Right.
So like Motueka is one I've used a lot in some of our sour IPAs, and it's just because lime's a good addition to a lot of fruits.
A good compliment, and I think that makes sense because people also associate acidity with lime, and so by pulling that character out, that it almost kind of makes the acidity make sense, in a flavor perspective. So let's talk a little bit about that, acid process. You mentioned the first version of this, the collab Drop Ceiling, was foeder, kind of sour beer that was part of this, and this is a different process. Is this a kettle sour process?
Yeah, pretty much. So my original plan was to all our sour IPAs we were just going to call foeder IPAs, and obviously that didn't work out, but. We essentially do like a kettle sour process. This single wall tank right here, which is a 12-barrel bright, I actually bought for blending wine barrels for our mixed fermentation program. And it's ended up being much more useful than that. So it was one of those purchases where I'm like, I don't know if I really should spend this much money on what I'm going to get out of it. And now it's like, I don't know what the hell I would do if I didn't buy it. So like we basically do a double batch. We do all the boiling at that time, push it into there. We use a lactobacillus blend. And that takes it down to a specific pH range we're looking for.
Okay.
So once we hit there, we'll send it back to the kettle, and we actually run it through our heat exchanger with our hot liquor tank flowing through it. So we can heat up our 12 barrels of sour wort essentially into our mash tun and kettle in a little over an hour, and then we're at like 175 in our mash tun where one batch is, and as we're filling our kettle, we can turn on our heating elements and get that up to 180 range, and that's one of the only beers that we whirlpool cooler than like right at flame out. So we whirlpool it with, depending on the hops, we try and shoot for like what we believe we would gain, like 30 to 35 IBU out of the whirlpool. And then we treat it like a normal batch after that. So it goes into one of our fermenters, and we ferment it with our house strain. And that was a little worrisome the first time. I'm like, I don't know how our strain's going to react in an acidic environment, but it does not care at all, which was a little surprising.
Right.
And then we kind of treat it very much like our pale ales more than our IPAs. So our dry hopping's decently aggressive on it, but not over the top.
Yeah.
And we generally fruit and dry hop at the same time.
Okay.
So
we've not had aseptic puree.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anything we're putting in our cans, like we don't want to bring in real fruit into the scenario, just because. Well, we don't want to have
puree is real fruit.
Yeah.
It's
raw
just
fruit, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah. It is definitely real fruit.
Yeah.
Which was poor wording on my end.
That's all right.
But yeah, like an aseptic fruit, so we don't have to worry about infecting our canning line or anything like that, because ultimately that's not something we want to do.
Right. Now, there's still with these, you're pushing residual sugar, into, through that aseptic puree into a beer that's, probably still has some yeast in it.
Yep.
What does that re-fermentation process look like? And how do you still, kind of maintain because a little bit of sweetness to this really kind of softens that fruit character. It's necessary, I think, to make this beer work. How do you maintain that kind of residual sweetness without, again, creating cans that are going to explode?
Sure. So kind of our viewpoint on doing that is lactose sugar. So it's kind of a different sweetness you're going to get, but it helps give you a little bit of perception of sweetness and also the body.
So you're pushing lactose back into it since it's not fermentable after the beer is fully attenuated and re-fermented?
So we introduce the lactose, and when we are pushing out of our single wall bright back to the kettle to reheat for whirlpool. So we actually put it in during the whirlpool, which was a little worrisome. I was worried. Since it's not getting boiled, are we really sterilizing it? But we've not had any issues with it.
Okay.
It's something I continue to monitor, or we continue to monitor. So like every time we package a 4-pack of any beer, we set them out warm to make sure we don't see cans explode, we don't see infections, things like that. And we did have one instance where we had a sour IPA re-ferment in cans, and it was like day 14. We had a 4-pack explode down here, so it was super worrisome when that happened. It's not something I want our brewery associated with, as exploding cans. And like a few people posted online, and people would be criticizing that person for not keeping it cold, and that's something I'd always chime in on and be like, no, that's not why we have that on our packaging. It's on there to preserve flavor. This is not their fault this can exploded. It's absolutely mine. So in that instance, it was fruit came in late.
Okay.
So our fruit was like 8 days late. which was super worrisome already as it was, but I didn't really have a choice other than wait it out or dump it. So we waited it out, got the fruit, put the fruit in. It fermented to an extent, but it was still very sweet compared to our other sour IPAs.
Okay.
And it sat there for a couple days, wasn't moving. And I'm like, well, I guess maybe that's where it's going to stop. And probably when we transferred over, we kicked up more yeast and got it back excited and made some problems for us. So.
Yeah. How'd you handle that?
So basically, it was, if you had any issues with it, let us know. We'll gladly replace it with 4 packs of anything. So like we wanted people to come back in if they had issues with it. We want to replace these cans. It's on us, not you. So we didn't see a ton of people, so I think most people kept them cold. Which is great, but it's still, I'm sure there's cans still out there waiting to explode at some point. Hopefully not, but it's something we're kind of just monitoring as we go. So if people bring it up to us, and if it's been in group Facebook groups or anything like that, I just kind of state, hey, if anyone else has issues, please bring it up to us. Bring in the 4-pack. Don't even bring it in. We don't care. We'll replace it. Type thing.
I guess St. Louis is good for that. There's an active kind of social group, and so with I don't know 6,000 or 7,000 members in it, and so it's a great communication source to get that feedback and then push that information back to them.
It's a positive thing for the most part, and it can be negative. I can't complain about the Facebook groups because they definitely streamlined our reputation and getting people to come out and visit us. So the day and age of the social media definitely is helpful to businesses, but it also can be harmful at times. Luckily, it's been pretty good for us.
So what's next for Narrow Gauge? What's on the horizon for you?
I guess our big horizon look is we are looking at relocation and expansion. So as you can see, we've filled this space out pretty much to what we can do in it. So we're looking at getting closer to the city of St. Louis. So we have our eyes on a spot we're looking pretty hard on now. So we're just waiting to go through some of the legality issues that we got to overcome with it, with liquor licensing, things like that. So it being in a neighborhood's a little more interesting. So we got to get signatures to make sure they're going to allow us to be in that building. So, but we're pretty hopeful. The community as a whole seems very positive for us moving in. There's been some vocal outspeaks, but you're going to have that with anything you're trying to do.
Will the basement brewery live on, or are you going to somehow move all this gear back out?
The plan's to pull it all out. I don't even really like to think about it, but it's too, I don't know. I love the 6-barrel batch size. It gives us a lot of creative freedom to make a batch of beer and kind of see how we like it, how our customers like it, and it'll end up being a real nice pilot batch, but we'll still probably run it the same way we run it today. So brewing 3 double batches one week, 2 double batches the following week. So it'll continue to make probably a good amount of beer.
Nice. Jeff Hardesty, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
If people want to learn more about Narrow Gauge, where do they find you?
So we are on all the major social media platforms. So Narrow Gauge Beer is our handle on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And then our website's narrowgaugestl.com.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Thanks for sharing some beers with me. We've tasted everything from Hellas to sour IPA and some double dry hopped IPA.
I got some stout in here we can try too.
We'll have to do another episode for that one. I want to thank this episode's sponsors as well. G&D Chillers sets the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. Download the free Tavor app today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. brew guru, and Clarion Lubricants, the expert that experts trust. Cool. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.